Philosophers that I owe most to intellectually are Kant and Wittgenstein, I suppose, neither of whom I find consoling to read, although I suppose Kant's moral philosophy in the end is sublime. It does give one a vision of what is possible, and so has something of that consoling power. But that in Plato too, I mean, obviously in the last days of Socrates, the last dialogues about Socrates, you see a wonderful image of what philosophy might be, by way of a raising of you above the mortal concerns, and an irradiation of the soul by a divine light. And that is a wonderful vision, but it very rarely comes to you just through philosophy alone. On the other hand, I would hate to be without philosophy, because I know that I wouldn't understand many things that I need to understand in order to live, as it were, in friendship with myself. And that task...
You're describing it more or less, and this is not the first time, as a kind of therapy.
Yes. It's not just a therapy, because after all...
A means to an end.
Philosophy is also a search for the truth about matters in which the truth is hidden. It's a hard discipline.
What are the answers until now? Assembling, what kind of a picture of human beings you have after so many years, so many centuries of philosophy? I mean, are we any closer to any answer?
It's a very good question. I suppose I would say that with Spinoza that the truth of our condition is very difficult to understand, and like everything worthy of knowledge, it's as difficult as it is rare, as he says at the end of the Ethics. We achieve understanding anew in every epoch, and it takes the greatest of intellectual and cultural effort to do it. This is what civilization is for, to achieve this self-understanding. But it does seem to be the case that no sooner has it been achieved and it's lost again, and that the knowledge that really matters is more easily lost than gained. We can gain easily piecemeal knowledge of this and that, and build up whole libraries of piecemeal knowledge, but the conception of the why and what of human existence dawns on people only at the apex of their endeavours, and once it has dawned, it is usually then eclipsed straight away by ignorance. And we are going through a period of eclipse. That is quite obvious. We're entering a dark age in which people will know an awful lot of information, but very little coherent, holistic truth. And this has happened before, many times before. But the wonderful thing is that it's still possible to gain a vision, to stand on a little peak, not perhaps the peak on which, say, Spinoza stood, or Plato, but nevertheless a peak of one's own, and look across at all this sea of ignorance and confusion and hysteria, and smile at it.
Compared to the 14, 15-year-old, looking for the question, did you succeed in finding some reasonable or consoling answers concerning your own childhood till the moment you left home?
I wasn't, no, I mean...
Was part of the enterprise reconciliation with that childhood?
In the end, yes, reconciliation with everything. There is an image of consolation which has been very influential in our civilization, in particular in the modern period, which you find in Hegel and Hölderlin and the Romantics generally, but also in people like Marx, of an initial condition of oneness, what Hegel called unmediated unity, from which we diverge by some outward-going process, objectification, Entfremdung, and so on, and then we overcome that through a dialectical synthesis and rediscover that original oneness, but in a, as it were, transformed and self-conscious state. And that's the image that drives Hegel's philosophy. And it's a very powerful image. Of course, it has its origins in the myth of the paradise and the fall and the redemption, and which is perhaps a myth far deeper than any one religion. It goes to the heart of what we are, and I suppose the true power of religion is that it makes death itself into that final redemption, so that you do come home at the very moment when you leave all your sufferings behind. Now, without going into that religious expectation and hope, I think that in this world, once you've experienced this fragmentation and alienation, which intellectuals always do, feel that you're under an obligation then to look for that process of reconciliation, whereby you rediscover the oneness which you once had, or perhaps, if you've never had it, that you invent it for yourself.
You invent it.
Yeah. And I think that you must do that, otherwise you're a trouble to others. Intellectuals in particular are a trouble to others when they haven't achieved that serenity in themselves. And that's what, going back to what we were talking about earlier, that's what it seems to me is the real evil in people like Lenin and Hitler, is that the trouble in themselves is something which they have not regarded as their own problem, but projected it onto the world and wanted to find, by reorganizing the world, the unity and serenity that they could only ever find in themselves. And my view is that we're under an obligation, once we understand this, to find that serenity in ourselves, so as no longer to be a threat to others.
Did you find it?
Yes.
Serenity.
Yeah.
Describe it, because it's one of the key words to beauty and consolation.
Right. Well, serenity comes... I could go to define it. Can I have a little break?
Describe it. Want to have a little break?
Yeah, have a break.
Sereniteit. Vreemd woord. Bijna archaïs. Zo'n woord dat langzaam in onbruik raakt en tenslotte alleen in het woordenboek nog overleeft. Maar in de boeken van Scruton floreert het woord. Daar wordt het in ere hersteld. Sereniteit. We zullen erop terugkomen met muzikale begeleiding. Maar eerst nog staat God op de agenda. De noodzaak van de religie, haar troost. De religie die van de dood een thuiskomst maakt. De eeuwigheid is onze herder.
I play the organ in church every Sunday because I'm the organist here in the village. So I always play Bach then, but my fingers are too rusty to play Bach very well. Beethoven has always been a great love, Chopin too, and Mozart.
Waar vind je nog een filosoof vandaag de dag die ongegeneerd in God gelooft? Althans, in de noodzaak van het geloof in God. Die organist is in een plattelandskerk en die de schoonheid en troost van de religie bezingt in nogal wat toonaarden. Die filosoof vind je in Wiltshire, Engeland.
We live in a difficult world, a world full of threats. I know that I must die. I need to face up to that particular fact. I know that the civilization in which I live is in a very unhealthy and distressed state, without knowing why, that it's lost all conception of its own unhappiness, so to speak. And these are difficult things to live with, and you need consolation for these. And this is where, of course, beauty is so important. Not only beauty, religion is important to me, though very much, as it were, on the periphery of my field of vision, but it's always there.
What do you mean by religion? I talk about religious feelings, religion as a metaphor for...
Religious feelings that this world is not complete in itself, that there is something upon which it depends and towards which it tends, which is greater than it, but which we can't put into words. And that's that God feeling. I think that's all important. It helps one as well to see clearly what things matter and what things don't. I'm very concerned that people having lost this God feeling, this sense, as I just described, that there being something greater than the world on which it depends and towards which it is aimed. Having lost that, people are totally at sea when any major collective emotion comes into play. And we saw that with the ridiculous hysteria over Princess Diana. We see it in thousands of ways, and hysteria dominates national politics now, and it dominates, alas, the dealings between nations. And I fear that the only channel for these collective feelings, which enables us to maintain moral equilibrium in the midst of them, is that which is provided by the sense of the divine. And as people lose that sense, because they lose their attachment to any formal religion in which it is rehearsed and made real, then they become prey to superstition on the most appalling kind. I think it's no accident that the loss of faith in our century immediately was accompanied by the rise of totalitarian government, communism and Nazism and fascism, all of which are atheistic creeds growing out of their superstitions, which would grow out of people's loss of any sense of the Godhead. So to me, a constant return to that sense is absolutely vital if I'm to maintain a moral equilibrium.
Is that the reason, or are you just wanting to re-establish the mental picture of God or the covenant?
It's there in me, and I have to rehearse it all the time, because I think otherwise modern life would be unbearable. I see it, it would be a source of great unhappiness to see people adrift as they are, and to be adrift with them. It would be very disturbing for me. So I'm constantly trying to re-establish equilibrium in the midst of this, and try also to say in public what that equilibrium is. It doesn't make you popular, of course.
No, God. We got rid of him, finally. We finally recognized that we were totally alone in the universe. Oceans of time before us, oceans of time after us, Schopenhauer. Yeah, in the midst we were.
Yes.
Giving meaning to our lives. Just one little second in eternity. And now you're coming up with God again. In 3 or 4 minutes you're talking about a moral God, or not?
Yes, I'm talking. I'm not talking the language of old-fashioned theology, but I'm saying that the experience that I'm referring to is implanted in all of us, and if we deny it, then we are completely at sea. And you only have to look at 20th century history to see the truth of that. It doesn't, it's a deep metaphysical question what this experience actually means. And one of the things that occupies me all the time. But not to revisit that experience is dangerous. People don't revisit it, just as they don't revisit so much of their own selves, because it frightens them. But, sometimes a certain measure of awe and fear are appropriate. But I wouldn't say, of course, that this is part of consolation exactly, but it's an equilibrating device. We live in a world of total disequilibrium, and whenever affected by it, we need to restore ourselves. Or we should restore ourselves. So I go through restorative attempts of this kind.
Do you have any mental image of God? The eternal machine or whatever?
No, a mental image is not. I'm very much of Spinoza's persuasion that imagery always will falsify the deity. One should learn to live beyond imagery.
What kind of a personality is he, she?
Only by revelation can you really grasp this, because you're trying to grasp the whole of things, whereas we are only given insight into tiny parts. But why not take the experience that we have of each other and say, at least in this little part, I can see how personality shines through mere things, as it does when I look into the eyes of somebody whom I really love. Why not think of it in that way? You might say, this is what was meant by those who said that man was made in the image of God, whoever it was who wrote the book of Genesis.
Oh, now we're running into trouble, aren't we? If I look into the eyes of Joseph Goebbels,
well,
we're talking about the image of God.
You are, but you're also talking about a freedom that has been abused, aren't you? You blame Joseph Goebbels for what he is, but in doing so you must also recognise that he freely chose to do something evil.
Yes, and?
Well, that sort of freedom you also want to attribute, also will have to attribute to God. Now the question is, you're going to ask is, well, are we sure that God used his freedom as he should? All I can say is that you have to understand what the difference is between something bad, or something seeming to be bad, happening, and something evil being done. All the evil in the world, in my view, is traceable to human choice. Bad things happen, but they're not in themselves evil. When somebody dies, it's a bad thing for him, but unless he was murdered, that's not an evil. I don't want to exonerate God either. It's not my business to produce a theodicy. I just want to say how it should be seen.
God leaves mankind some freedom for decision making. Why does he, she do it? Is God omnipotent, almighty or not, in your...
Freedom freedom is a precondition of love, isn't it? You couldn't love something if you thought it was an automaton. You all know the story of Olympia that E.T.A. Hoffmann tells. You remember in that wonderful story called The Sandman. Olympia, the doll that's wound up and inspires love in the romantic, deluded poet. Of course, the whole point of this story is that if you ever did come to see somebody in that way, love becomes ridiculous. Love towards the automaton. Brilliantly put across by Offenbach in Tales of Hoffmann. I don't know if you know that opera. Well, likewise with human being, if you ever did lose the belief in their freedom, then it would be impossible to love them. And one assumes, I'm not a theologian, and I don't want to talk theology, but one assumes that it's an elementary truth of theology that God created us free in order that we should love him, and that he should love us. And what would be the point of creating a load of automata just to play around with dolls?
Are you talking about a kind of Socinian God? A God evolving with us in time? Not only a God who wants to be loved, but a kind of Humpty Dumpty who has to be held.
No. The question is, he has no need of us, except insofar as he has a need to love.
He created us in order to be loved.
But to say he created us, of course, is to say that we're not part of him, which we are. We're part of that thing which he is. This is a very Spinoza's conception I'm putting across. Put it this way, I don't have a clear theological conception, such as a priest or a doctor of the faith would have. I can't answer all these questions.
If we see our presence in the universe at this very moment in time for 60 or 70 or 80 years as one whisper, and we can't give meaning to our own lives because there are no preconditions, there is no God, there is no moral statement in the universe itself, of the universe itself. Isn't that more challenging than returning to the old idea of a moral God who needs us to?
If you want to live your life being challenged, that's fine, but
you want to be consoled?
Yes. No, I mean, there are a lot of things which are more challenging than my worldview, but it doesn't follow that they're, for that reason, more true. And it's possible for someone like Rilke to live with a kind of death of God feeling, to say to himself, for God has been taken from the world along with so much else, I will now remake everything according to my own inner light and find consolation there. And to some extent that's what I do, but not everybody is Rilke. Most people deprived of this kind of consolation don't rise to the challenge at all. They sink a long way beneath it and live without that aspiration to be something better that they would otherwise have had. So I'm very much opposed to taking this sort of thing away from people. If you lose it yourself, then of course that could be regarded as a misfortune, or you might regard it as a great liberation, as Nietzsche tried to do. But that's your problem, you deal with it. And I have my own way of dealing with it, and I think I have dealt with it and worked my way back to something, not really the God of organised religion or anything like that, but I've worked my way back to something like the God idea, I'm given it a place in my life which enables me to stand to some extent in judgment on myself, as I think I should.
If I say afterlife,
that's a mystery. It's the same mystery as time itself, isn't it? What we are only here and now.
yeah,
But here and now is also eternal when properly experienced.
it is, Mr. Scruton, but after 60 or 70 years, you're dead and buried. That's it. The world goes on, reality goes on, time goes on.
That may very well be true. But look at it in another way. Those 70 years that were given to you under subspecie eternitatis, they haven't been taken from reality. Nobody in the future is going to revisit them, but you will revisit them because they are yours. You won't revisit them in time, but that time is yours and is yours eternally. And this is what Nietzsche should have meant by eternal recurrence.
Yeah.
That you should live each moment of your life not as though it were a fleeting moment, but as though it were eternally there, fixed, made what it is, but fixed, as it were, in another dimension. And that is a consoling thought, because after all, in this time, in time as we experience it, after death you are no more, and therefore you lose nothing, nor do you gain anything. And there is nothing for you to miss. But in these 70 years you have everything, and it will be there always. Those are your 70 years. And how to envisage that? You can't envisage that without you. You can't envisage those 70 years from a point of view outside them, in which you are not. Any perspective that you can have on them is a perspective which will show them to be eternally there with you. And you will never lose them, except by losing yourself. So it's up to you to live them well. And when Dr. Faustus in Christopher Marlowe's play says, "This is hell, nor am I out of it," that's what he means. His pact with the devil has translated his world into hell by the very fact that it's now based upon a compromise of his being, a surrender of his freedom to a force which he detests. Anyway, that's slightly mystical, but what's the point of philosophy if it doesn't enable you to say mystical things?
Why is it that so many people are longing after a wonderful paradise, an afterlife, eternity? Do we understand it? Well, I'm not talking about the view of Nietzsche now. I'm talking about the everyday view of people going to a church longing for eternity, eternal life.
Well, it's a parable of that eternity is what they have.
It seems to be looking for consolation, is it?
Yes. Of course. When people lose that longing for paradise, they start instead longing to win the national lottery or something. They engage in vulgar secular versions of it. I mean, it's in all of our nature to long for the compensation for what we have not had, and to think that finally there'll be given to us that which we've always wanted. But it may be that that is the only way that many people can live properly by holding in front of themselves this ideal and trying to earn it. But of course it doesn't stand up very easily to examination. But there's nothing vulgar or silly in wanting that. And after all, the greatest trial that all human beings have to confront is that of death. It's how to accept the fact that that I will die. What is it that how should I think of myself in order to do that? I've just given a way of thinking of it, which makes it easier for you, people like you and me, to confront this. But it wouldn't make it easier for many people. They need something else. The concept of consolation that we have is influenced through and through by the Christian religion, which is, after all, the foundation of our civilization, and it's what glows in the embers of Hegel's philosophy too. And this presented us with this extraordinary image of consolation through loss in the death of God himself on the cross, and most extraordinary voluntary renunciation of this life and acceptance of the most painful form of death, which in itself perhaps has a tragic quality to it, but also is a redemptive story. It's a story about the redemption of the soul through this repudiation of earthly things. Mm-hmm. It has been the central image of consolation in our tradition, and it's a most extraordinary idea.
For you, it remains a kind of ultimate symbol.
Yes, of a yes.
But why?
That there is a path of renunciation, which is also an acceptance. It's not a path that I have the strength to take.
Why should we accept? Father, forgive them. Come on.
But why should we not accept when we have to? We have two choices. One is to go towards our end, accepting it. The other is to be dragged kicking and screaming towards it, but it's the same outcome either way. The only thing that we have the freedom to do is to achieve